Alright, response video to Piro. To Inmendham, neither of us is glib. So, he's playing games, turning around the accusation, implying that somehow there's something glib in my responses to life and the issue of philosophy in general. And it's just so obviously bullshit, and it's just a game he's playing to evade the subject, which he just does throughout the whole video by talking about war and rape, as if these are the only things wrong with the formula that is human organisms. It's just not the only thing wrong. Divorce, the horrors of alcoholism. I could go through just things in your own life that are probably had much more of a profound effect on your comfort and ease of living than war and rape. Not that they're not bad things, but frankly, they don't hit you where you live. They hit somebody else where they live. So anyway, just irritating. So let's, in overview, this is about, Piro just doesn't like the idea of dissing life, okay, because he's a life guy, he's a nature guy. He thinks Mother Nature is a real concept in a way, and he don't like people talking, about her whoring around and shit. It's a bad reputation thing. He doesn't want her, her integrity harmed. He wants to, he's defensive about nature. And most of this argument about with the whole human race is just about the bullshit part. People are indoctrinated into a way of thinking, and they are not able to escape that indoctrination. They're not able to clean themselves of the fungus, that's the roots have gone into their brain and create all kinds of weakness in their logic. So just becoming an atheist isn't enough. You have to pull the roots out all the way of all the crap that you've bought, the conventional, traditional notions of what it is to be breathing atmosphere on the surface of planet Earth. That it is made of this biosphere that is getting ground up every day in a silly contest for surviving, merely to replicate and create another victim to be ground up in the process. No real winners, just all kinds of different ways of losing, and losing really badly or getting away semi-unscathed. And these people, because of their in-the-box thinking, think that winning is not losing as much as the other guy. They think that's winning, and that's where it all breaks down logically, and that's why they have to resort to distraction and rationalization to evade the subject. So anyway, for context, Piro brought this up using Sisyphus as the example, and now he's reinterpreted Sisyphus to mean that the real myth of Sisyphus was really a story about how if you get a big enough stick, you can push the boulder over the top and you win, and you live in utopia. So Sisyphus isn't about finding, acclimating and finding acceptance in a feudal circumstance. No, apparently the myth is about, well, if you push the boulder right, you can get to the top and you can push the boulder over. So again, he's just as he breaks every thought experiment everybody's ever presented him with. He's now broken Sisyphus, and he's using it as an example of how, well, if we push the boulder right, if we hit the right buttons on the boulder, we can create a utopia. And that's not Sisyphus. It's not a proper use of Sisyphus. It's just cheating all over the fucking place, and it's bullshit. So I call him on that and say that he's still not conceding the fundamental argument, which is that you're not going to be able to control this experiment, and it comes with, unlike the Sisyphus myth, there's more than just the struggle of your harm, the harm of your own struggle through life. The real game, the real question is the harm of the people you impose the consequences of that game you're playing on. So when the boulder rolls down, it may roll over somebody. If you've procreated, that's the consequence. You may create victims, and you can't just say, whoops, my bad. He wants to argue that the most important question to ask is to be or not to be. That's not the most important question. The most important question is to impose or not to impose. Will I create or not to create? This is the more important question. Whether Dr. Frankenstein kills himself or not is not a story. Whether he plays with the dead and forces them to live is the question. The big one. Big Frankenstein. Big. So anyway, so he's really not conceding the fundamental argument, which it is in the nature of existence that you're not going to have control over the experiment, and that the fundamental nature of the experiment is futile. It's a consumption game, and consumption has to come with a price. There's no free lunch. You don't get to eat for free, and that is the problem here. And if you do it in some kind of perfect way to minimize the harm of the feeding, the hunger, there's just too little glory in that to justify the obscene inefficiency that's possible. The downside risk is infinite. It's almost, and it's just you can't justify exposing yourself to that level of catastrophe for a projected satisfaction, a projected necessity. There's no rational necessity for our existence. Therefore, you can't use a projected, I kind of feel it like it's good kind of argument to defend exposure to that risk, when the only evidence of the value is your own perception of a necessity. Again, I bring up the non-existent Martians, non-existent Venetians, and how they aren't fundamentally missed. Okay. So, and then he uses this argument of poor people, and somehow they're an example of the futility of my argument, in the sense that they will never be educatable, they'll never be able to have any other perspective, because it's born into them through the hardship of their life that they will desire it even more, because the harder you make their life, the more they're going to want to live, the more they're going to want to have kids. And that's what's not driving them. We know that in poor countries, people are more cynical and sadistic in their perspective, and that it's all based on very ignorant notions of hierarchy and entitlement, and it's all this ego bullshit, and even gross servitude, where people have children as if they're lottery tickets. If you have enough of them, one of them might win and buy you your retirement. They have kids to work the farm. I mean, it's just it's overtly cruel and sadistic and selfish. And that, of course, in my opinion, is behavior that can be demonstrated to be wrong, and that behavior can be corrected easily with not much education. But obviously they're not getting much education, because people like Piro won't say anything to them. Anyway, so again, he keeps saying that it's futile to argue antinatalism. I have some timestamps, but I'll just go when I'm done doing my spiel. Maybe I'll randomly jump through pieces of this, but there's no real point. Internal exercise. He was saying, considered suicide as an intellectual exercise. And so I presented the counter argument last night. Would you consider shoving a telephone pole up your ass as an intellectual exercise? People don't consider suicide as an intellectual exercise. They consider it because they have some doubts about the integrity of the game, because it does have these overt and loud missing bits, these bad parts, and there's a real question in terms of how much risk you're exposing yourself to in existing, and how much pain you're willing to endure, and all those things are legitimate questions. So I'm not faulting you for deciding it's worth living. I'm just saying that to not concede that your initial evaluation was based on a genuine concern or doubt about the real integrity of the game is bullshit. So anyway, rationalizing control, I said, just, he gets lucky, and he thinks he doesn't even account for that luck. So he thinks, if I get another chance to do the experiment, I know I could do it right this time. But frankly, the next time your daughter's going to have cancer, or she breaks her leg, or some other horror might happen. She gets paralyzed. So I mean, you might be able to press the right buttons in the next experiment that you didn't press this time, but there'll be new circumstances that you won't be lucky in. So your luck balance is going to be different, and so now you're going to have new hurdles to jump over or through, and you might just as easily get burned or knifed trying to get through those. So you're still not conceding the fundamental nature of the game, which is, Paul Newman's kid commits suicide. I mean, you can't control this game. So anyway, it's a futile fight against change. Not exactly sure what I'm saying there, but yeah, I guess it has to do with his argument that we can just keep creating a cure. We can just keep curing the problems, and even if a new problem comes up, we just keep curing it. It's just a futility to that. Who wants to fight wars against parasites, or nature, or the environment, or human nature, or all this? What, you just completely raising your children to be warriors in some fight? And I've had this argument with him before, and his ideology that somehow my kids are going to fix the world or improve the world. It's so fundamentally and catastrophically broken. It's an arduous servitude to create people to go change the world. You're not going to have fun doing that. Only somebody fairly glib could think it would be a good time, to play hero. It's not going to be a good time. It's going to be work, and it's going to be pain. It's not fun fixing something this broken. It's like doing whatever they call that before surgery, the triage in a war. It's not a fun job. So anyway, so again, he keeps talking about his past thinking, and he's just not recognizing that this isn't about what happened in the past. It's about what happens in the future. The future's the whole game, and you rationalizing your past decisions doesn't really have anything to do with the subject. Alright, not failed at everything. So again, he keeps talking as if, well, if I just did this tweaked it a little different, things would have worked out okay. And so, I can win. And certainly other people, I'll give them their chance to play the game. I think they should have their fair chance to experiment. And so he'd even concede, I think, that he put more energy and more effort into it than the average person, and yet he'd give them the keys to the car. So it's like, what's the point of waxing the car and taking care of the car if you're going to give the keys to some asshole who doesn't care about the wax, it doesn't care about the interior, and it's just going to trash the thing? What logic is there in that? Why care about your car if you're going to give the keys to an asshole? I call that glib. Alright, activism. Haha. Yeah. Something he said, I laughed at the activism thing. Yeah, so I don't know exactly what it was, but yeah, it said something to do with it somewhere. I try to move along. It's going to take forever if I don't. Cannot fail. Yeah, well, so he keeps trying to downgrade antinatalism as a as an approach to the human race, as if it's somehow destined to failure or doomed. And it just doesn't work that way. It just requires you to do the simplest thing. Say, please stop. That doesn't take much effort at all. I would prefer that you not put children at jeopardy, period. These are not complex or hard things to say. And the power of them, once they've been said, is intrinsic. If you stop one individual from recklessly reproducing, it's a victory. If you stop 10, it's 10 times the victory. If you stop 100, it's 100 times the victory. There's no way you can't succeed in walking in that direction. And there's so little effort in saying the words, please stop, or saying the words, I've concluded I'm not competent to be a creator, so what makes you think you are? Or something like that. To demand from these people you're giving power to some description of how they're going to take care of the car, that they got this thing under control, that they have some control mechanism you didn't have. Not to demand that minimum is just a glib denial of the risk. Just a glib denial of the potential for harm. You would do it again, but it is alright. You wouldn't do it again, but it's alright for others to try to do it. So that's basically what he said. He said pretty clearly, based on what I've learned, yeah, I understand I don't have the power. I'm not a superhero. I'm not God, and I shouldn't be in the creation business. And yet he'll give the keys to people who have lesser skills, lesser passion, lesser integrity, lesser potential to do it right. And that makes no sense logically. If that's like saying I'm voluntarily choosing not to be a rapist, but if you want to rape, it's okay. I voluntarily choose not to start a war, but if you want to start one, it's okay. It's just, I voluntarily choose not to play with nuclear material in my backyard, but if you want to, it's okay. It's nonsense. That's all that is. So anyway, so yeah, it's just like they're not going to try harder, and they're not going to have the intellectual skills to do better. So not talking about what you did, about what you... Okay, so it's not, I'm not talking about what you did, I'm talking about what you are doing. And he's not getting that. My complaint is with your glib acquiescence to some sort of right to for people dumber than yourselves to have more power than you'll give yourself. That's not sensical. It's not responsible. So I could use a million analogies to describe it, but it's kind of like some expert pilot being on a plane as a passenger. Say the pilots get wiped out, and the expert pilot says, well, let's just draw straws to see who flies the plane. It wouldn't make any sense. And it would be a failure of him to take responsibility for his knowledge. If you have knowledge, you have a responsibility to apply it in the world. If you've gained something through experience, you have a responsibility to help enlighten other people with that gained knowledge. It's irresponsible for you to keep your mouth shut, for you to claim that somehow, I don't know it. You know it now. You know the danger. You know the heavy weight of the risk being played with. Edify people with that knowledge. Don't sit there and pretend you haven't learned anything. Or don't tell me you've learned something and then not apply the knowledge, because that's not consistent with somebody who has actually learned something. So, not calling it a mistake. You was a defense, I don't know. Here, we can let that one slide. We still have a couple of pages of crap to go, so we can miss a few points. Personal delusion to conceive a child to your ambitions. Yeah, so I made this argument before, but isn't that what most people are doing? They're creating children based on their ambition, their need, their hunger, their desires. It's not about some sort of rational, it's not a rational act, it's not a reasoned act, it's not a thoughtful act. It's a personal and a selfish act, and people should have, intellectuals, sensible people, should have the balls to at least put it in that category, label it properly as selfish indulgence, and quit pretending it's something other than any other vice like alcoholism or smoking or this or that. It's a vice, procreation. It's not something to admire people for. It's not something to congratulate people for. It's something to point out that, well, aren't you the arrogant risk taker? Because that's what it reveals, is an arrogant risk taker. Somebody who thinks they're in control and doesn't care, has glibly denied, has glibly stepped over recognition that the downside risk will be paid for by someone else. So you basically keep selling, he's just selling this, everything's all good BS. You just cure a few diseases and everything's just fine, and life is just perfectly functional. And it's just a deny of evolution, it's a deny of the function of the biology, it's a denial of the fundamental nature of what life is, a consumption game. And so, I mean, I could go into these arguments, but he's wasted time, basically just talking about how everything's getting so much better, and even that is just such a lie, because things are only getting better in the traditional notion of a better life, which is somehow a longer life. But if you add up how consciousness has actually been affected in the last 200 years, well, billions of more animals are slaughtered, and human beings spend more time disabled than they have at any point in human history as a percentage of their conscious existence, where we die slower and harder. We don't die better, because everybody's still stuck in traditional notions that you can't violate either God or nature, that these are sacrosanct, these are sacred territories. We are not allowed to judge life, we're not allowed to judge the game, we're supposed to just do our civicus duty, push our stupid boulder, and not complain. And this is just a traditional, myopic, fake heroism, especially when the heroism comes from arrogant, obnoxious assholes, like this asshole does often attempt to impugn the character of anti-natalists, you know, silly little elitist rich kids who have nothing better to complain about. And I would argue that these glib assholes waving their flag for life, you know, when they're not paralyzed, when they're not dying of ALS, when they're not you know, spending most of their time with a migraine headache or something, fuck them and that bullshit. To glibly diminish or devalue the pain people express and explain when they overtly say it to you directly, I'm in pain, and I never want this pain to be experienced again. And you glibly just step right over that and say, who cares? Not my problem. I'm busy having kids. I'm a baby maker. You know. Alright, so again, he brought up the civicus thing and this complete butchering of the whole point of the myth and how it's brought up. It's brought up in the Stoic sense, and that you should just feel good about doing a good job of pushing your boulder, and you shouldn't worry about boulder pushing and worrying about consequences and worrying about end results, because somehow it's all inevitable, and even if Sisyphus jumps off the ramp, somehow another Sisyphus will take his place. It's all this, you know, you're the one with the feudal philosophy, and I'm the one arguing that the cure is simple. It's rationality, logic. Get the bullshit out of your brain, pull the fungus that has eaten your brain out of your brain, and the truth is quite obvious, quite simple, quite visible. We're evolved flatworms. We haven't escaped the fundamental dynamic of the game. It's just silly consumption for the non-existent accomplishment of perpetuating silly consumption. So anyway, still talking shit after human dickless incomplete. Yeah, I don't know. Whatever, but you're still talking shit, that's for sure. Vague values, well, I would defend that as that, yeah, you just keep talking about personal choices in an atmosphere where we have pretty much universal and absolute knowledge. So people don't really have a personal choice to think the world is flat and to walk their children off the edge of the planet, right? They don't have a personal choice to do that. You would stop them. There's lots of things you wouldn't let people do to their children because you know it's just plainly wrong. So that game is over. Personal choice has to be confined by knowledge of absolute stupidity. You know, so that's where it ends. When you've proven people stupid, wrong, stupid, ignorant, yeah, their choice goes away. Right to die. So he says, and then he uses the, oh, I know, you know I support the right to die, which doesn't mean anything. Supporting a right to die when you're going to force somebody to be of some age of authority just means that you're going to enslave them for 15 years or 20 years before you're going to give them that right to die. And there's no immediate evidence that that right is anytime soon going to exist. So again, you're using the existence of a non-existent right to defend your right. You really can't do that. You have a responsibility to build the nest first. I've used this argument before, but you can't talk about how you're going to lay eggs in some kind of utopia when you haven't built the utopia. You got to show me the nest before you give me excuses for laying eggs. So until you build the right to die, until you build a rational civilization that cherishes the welfare of all human beings, till you build that world, a nest, you have no right to be laying eggs. Jeez, there's no counter argument. There's no glib bullshit that you can weave to explain why you have a right not to build the nest, or why you have a right to say I'll lay the eggs first and force the chicks to build the nest. That's even a grosser escapism crap. Evasion of responsibility. So, yeah, deal with that argument, Mr. Glib. Anyway, human will reproduce. We're back to this, you know, the ignorant can't help themselves. And yeah, that's only if we don't help them think better. It's only if we keep supporting it. It's only if we keep waving flags as they're running their eggs across, you know, rolling their eggs across the finish line. So as long as you keep waving a flag supporting that shit, they'll keep doing it. But if you start booing a little, you start throwing some tomatoes, maybe they'll get the idea that winning that contest isn't a demonstration of integrity or strength or beauty or logic or winning or anything, that it's being an asshole. Anyway, so he kept bringing up war and rape, and like I said, these are just evasions of the subject. It's just a way of, you know, you can't win the argument, so you just change the subject. It's just a pointless distraction, as if I somehow support rape or war, which is a straw man in and of itself to make that implication. But certainly the fact that we haven't been able to stop something as simple as rape, that you have to train boys not to rape women. The fact that you even think we have to do that we'd have to train them not to do it, is already a concession to my point that this game is so broken, that this psychology is so fucking rotten at its core, it is so insectoid, that if you think you actually have to train somebody not to harm somebody else for completely a selfish indulgence, is, yeah, I win the argument on your concession, if that's what you're saying you have to do. If you have to train people not to rape, well, then you have nothing to argue in defense of. Alright. Alright, so he's basically making some kind of argument that somehow the ignorant can't be informed, and we know that that's the only reason why the poor are having kids is because they're ignorant, and he's basically arguing that somehow their ignorance is such a hard cement that you could never break through it. And I think that's a lie. And I think you certainly can't break through it if you don't try. If you're not willing to even walk up to the cement and say, break, if that's too much work for you, just saying the word break, then yeah, you're not going to fix anything ever. So I think this is all just sort of a bullshit rationalization. The point isn't that he wants to break the cement, he doesn't want to fix the problem, because he still has a psychology that is invested in the problem. But yeah, as I ended the argument, life is the problem. Rape isn't the problem. War isn't the problem. Consumption for the sake of replication on an island lifeboat filled with psychologies composed of addiction, that's the problem. Consumption, reproduction, cannibalism, addiction, or parasitism. We're parasites, Pierrot. We've had this argument before too. We're parasites. That's the nature of all living things, is to parasitically exploit an environment. That's its nature. So anyway. And not to concede that hundreds of millions of years in the percolation of these bizarrely eccentric flatworm parasites that we are, this bizarrely eccentric facades that have been wrapped around our GI tract to glorify or diminish the meaning and substance of all that waste for this, for the silly song and dance that we're singing, for this really bad show we're putting on. That's glib. Until next time.